Folks, welcome back. Weekly webinar, Dr. James, Dr. Mike, answering your ridiculous and sometimes great YouTube questions. Dr. Mike, how's it going?
Good. How are you, James?
I'm doing okay. Apologies in advance, folks. I might have to pass my phone off midway through the webinar. We're having like a little bit of a gas leak and the person's going to come out and fix it. So I might bug out for like 2 seconds. Apologies in advance. Other than that, I'm good. The one dog got neutered. So he's a bit of a cone head right now. He's not super happy about the cone situation. But he's good. He's good. He got snipped.
When does the other one get spayed?
A little bit later on. So when they're brother and sister, you have to get it done earlier than normal. Not like way early, but just a slight on the early side of normal, just so you don't have any accidents. But the spay is more involved because they have to cut her open much deeper, and there's much more internal stuff.
They take stuff out.
They do the boys first because it's a real quick thing for the boy dogs and less crazy. So she'll be next. She's on the chopping block. Yeah.
All right, but first up is Darren Hawkins.
Oh boy. Right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Front and center.
So Darren Hawkins asks, you've mentioned that close grip bench isn't a great tricep builder. What about the overhead press, or is the dip the only compound lift? Thanks, Mike and James. The dip is not the only compound lift. There's tons of others. For example, the JM press and its variations is compound, and that's great tricep builder. But the overhead press can be a tricep builder that's decent, but usually it's not great. But Darren, you can actually answer that question for yourself, and so can everyone else viewing, by assessing your stimulus to fatigue ratio in the deadlift. In the overhead press. I was like, wait, that's the only one where it wouldn't count. Yeah, exactly. So basically you do overhead presses, and are your triceps getting tons of tension through them? Are they getting a burn at higher reps? Are they getting pumped, and are they getting super weak and sore afterwards? And if the answer is like, no, that's really just my front delts, then the answer is it's not a great tricep builder relative to the front delts. So sometimes it can turn into a great tricep builder if you pre-exhaust with some overhead extensions or some cable pushdowns, and then all of a sudden doing right after that, doing overhead press, the triceps become a limiting factor. But under most conditions, for most people, the answer is not really, but it really just depends. Try it yourself. And the same thing applies to close grip bench. Some people get a ton out of their triceps close grip benching. Most people don't get that much.
Yeah, and just to touch that one up a little bit, Darren, I think if I remember what we talked about last time, we were mostly just saying that the close grip bench is a chest movement fundamentally, right? Like, can you get some more tricep work in there by adjusting your grip? Sure. But like fundamentally, it's still a chest movement, and then the triceps would be an assistance. So ultimately, in those situations, like anything that's not directly training the muscle will always be subpar compared to things where that particular muscle is an accessory. So any of the pressing movements, overhead pressing, bench pressing, it's always an accessory kind of part of the movement, whereas the chest or the delts are going to be the big emphases of those movements. So for example, if your goal is to build big, strong triceps, like you probably would get more out of a tricep push down than a close grip bench in many cases, if you're kind of more of like an intermediate athlete and beyond. Beginners get a ton out of everything. So it's kind of one of those things where you might have a buddy who started his fitness journey with doing close grip bench presses and he got big arms from doing that. Well, that's great. A lot of people experience that same thing, but at some point you'll have to move on to more direct training, and that's just how it goes. Sometimes the compounds you just can't do enough at some point to get the stimulus that you need for the arms.
Next up, Bastian Ingerli.
What the fuck? All right, we're going Control F. We've learned. Bastian, gotcha.
James, this one's all you. Hi, docs. I want to increase my spiking power in volleyball. Even though I've seen RP's movement anatomy video on the shoulder, I'm still not 100% certain with my approach. So my question is, what muscles are involved in a powerful spike, and what exercise would you recommend for training them? I will say I was a sports scientist for volleyball for many years. My best answer is the triceps, the pectorals, the lats, and the serratus anterior and abdominal muscles, as well as hip flexors, are a good start. James, where did I err?
No, I think that's great. So the thing is, this is one of those, you might be doing a paralysis by analysis situation where you're like, well, how do I get strong at this one particular movement? Which leg of the rotator cuff muscles? Because you think about a volleyball spike, right? There's kind of like that cocking phase where you're pulling back. You get that amortization, that reflexing whip as you come through to hit it. But ultimately, kind of the the main action is that kind of shoulder extension downward and then kind of back towards that internal rotation. So you could spend a lot of time strengthening like the internal and external rotators of the shoulders, a la over the top, but you turn your fucking hat backwards, get in that truck, and you work that machine all day. You're going to spike the fuck out of that ball. Are you though? The reality is that you're going to get plenty of that work for those muscles doing a lot of the other big movements like your presses and your pulls. So Mike already highlighted the muscles, which I agree with, I think are probably the most important, especially anything that's going to do that kind of shoulder extension, pulling the arm down. So your lats, it's part of your pecs, like your serrati, any of those kind of scapular movers are going to be really good. Well, how do you make those really strong? Well, it turns out you do the same shit that you always do. You do strong pressing and pulling movements. And it turns out that's a great way of indirectly training a lot of the rotator cuff muscles and stuff anyway. So you approach that largely the same way as you would approach just developing a strong upper body for volleyball. And most of the explosiveness and power you're going to generate in that movement will come from you practicing your spike technique and just slowly getting stronger over time. So kind of the TLDR is get strong and get good. And that normally works itself out. If you spend a lot of time trying to perseverate and do the most nitpicky of the muscles in the shoulder joint and the shoulder girdle to try and increase your spiking power, you're probably wasting your time. Whereas if you develop a strong either press or overhead press, you get pretty good at doing like rows and pull-ups and you maintain relatively good shoulder health, man, you're right there.
That is a very good answer. Next up is Mike. Amazing YouTube
one and only
name. It's just one Mike.
Oh, your name is Mike. Control F. No. Okay, Mike Canis. That's not it.
You don't even have to pull it up because it's so short. I can just read it.
Okay, I'll try and find it in the meantime. Oh, I found it. There's Mike.
Okay.
Ooh, 41 likes. Very nice.
Yeah. What hypertrophy study would you do if you didn't have to consider ethics and you had none?
Okay, so you had no ethics. You had no personal ethics that you had to confront in addition to like institutional ethics.
Yeah. Well, I can answer this question.
That's pretty good.
Quite easily. I would, if I had no ethics. I had no ethics.
Some say you don't.
You're right. I would take a huge swath of the West African population and do a multi-generational forced interbreeding program whereby we selected the most elite hypertrophy genetics, multiplied over 20 generations. The runts would be Ronnie Coleman, and the elite would be something that is wildly unprecedented. There you go. You asked, I answered.
So YouTube Mike, not Mike Israel. You know that was going to go like some kind of weird eugenics type route, right? You know that that's the answer to that. And there's no other way around.
Said no ethics.
Maybe I'll go a different non-eugenics route and say, like when we have kind of the artificial intelligence revolution where we have like basically Ghost in the Shell type era stuff where people are just living with, all sorts of artificial enhancements. That's what I want to see. So what kind of experiment would that be? I don't know. Fucking hook somebody up to a Terminator and see if they're good at basketball. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Who knows?
There you go. Next up, Fionn Raud. Fionn Raud.
Is that F? Yep. There we go.
Ireland.
There's a jiu-jitsu fighter named Fionn Davies.
There you go. Oh, it's a woman, right?
Yep.
Isn't her name with two F's at the beginning?
Is it? I don't know.
It's two F's. I just call her Fiffion because why would you have two F's if you didn't want me to say that? All right. So Fionn, depending on how you say his name, says, "Hello, Dr. Zoology. Greetings from Iceland, land of tax loopholes. That keeps your country rich, by the way. And lockdown 2, electric boogaloo. Number one question is, okay, so we're sticking to the one question here. One question is about training experience and good grasp. One is about body fat percentage judging. James, which one should we answer?
I'm tired of answering body fat judging related questions.
Number one is a good question. They're both good. So Number one, I have a few years of training experience and feel as if I have a good grasp of the basics of hypertrophy training. Ultimately, I would like to train others and have started to train my teenage brother, obviously, complete beginner. What are the things I should pay special attention to in order to maximize my understanding of the process of getting jacked? Rate of progress and the issues they run into. Rate of progress is not something you pay attention to a lot, actually, because it's so influenced by genetics and training age. I don't know if it's going to tell you much. Definitely pay attention to issues they run into. Pay attention especially to the development of their technique. Make sure you are a stickler for good technique. Gently nudge them into technique. Make sure they're not lifting any more weight until their technique is at least stable and improving. That is huge. Also pay a lot of attention to their SRA dynamics, stimulus recovery adaptation. When they are getting muscle sore and or tired, when does that muscle or that group of muscles recover again? Because then you can adjust the frequency and the volume really well to them. The last thing I'll say is pay attention to their SFR indicators, how much of a pump and a burn and tension and weakness in the local muscle and soreness they're getting from various exercises and various techniques versus how much systemic fatigue they're getting and how much joint and connective tissue fatigue they're getting and the rating of perceived exertion. Because some exercises, some ways of training, some rep ranges, some techniques are going to be much better than others, and then you can slowly tailor the training to them and discover how their body works so that you can train them the best way possible. James?
Yeah, that was really good. Just for the sake of discussion, I might go a different route. So if you're working with people, like, so he says you're starting to train your teenage brother who's a beginner. Now, granted, I know that the question was more general. Oh, this is the call. Sorry, I got to run. I'm so sorry. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Whew, okay, sorry. Can I, did you want me to still answer?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I know the question was more broadly sweeping than just working with the beginner, but just to kind of, just food for thought, maybe go a different direction than Dr. Mike. Sometimes it's good to not make things overly complicated for beginners. And if that's mainly who you're going to be working with, at least in the beginning, you might kind of glaze over things like SFR so that they're not overly, because I've seen it go the other direction where you can get the paralysis by analysis. And the good thing with beginners is as long as their technique is good, and the loads are controlled and their efforts are controlled, they're going to reap huge, huge, huge benefits. And sometimes it makes things needlessly complicated when you ask them a bunch of questions which they barely understand yet. Like, how's that pump that you got? They're like, I don't know. I've never really done this before. Fair enough, right? And so with, and I know this is like specific to beginners, and I know maybe your question wasn't all about beginners, but in a lot of cases they are. When people come to you for help, they're largely noobs. So what I would say is, as Dr. Mike said earlier, focus on the technique and getting the basics, things like their relative effort. How dialed in are they to their maximal or close to their maximal abilities? Are they able to reproduce the technique under those different relative ability constraints, right? Like, can they keep their technique when they're putting in a 90% effort on a set or something like that? And I think those are the things that will carry them a really, really long way. And then as we've kind of outlined in, this is all, God, it's shameless plug, sorry. I finished my Pass on the Hypertrophy book, so it's off the top of my mind, right? So we actually outline a lot of these things in the hypertrophy book where we say when you have beginners, thanks, Mel, don't worry about the complicated shit. Worry about technique. As you move into your intermediate stages, start thinking more about things like your volume landmarks, getting those things dialed in. And as you get more advanced, start thinking about, right, like SFR, mind-muscle connection, and more advanced training things. As the trainer, you have to be able to identify what client populations you're working with and kind of work your way into those things and not making it needlessly complicated for your client. So know who you're working with, identify kind of what their training age is, and be able to outline some realistic session-to-session goals based on their training age, right? So if you have more intermediate clients, then you're thinking a little bit more about like SFR volume landmark stuff. If you got complete beginners, you're really just thinking about getting them a base of technique that will carry them out through the rest of their career. If you're working with advanced people, yeah, you got to know every single exercise, every single rep range, which is the best for that particular individual, and it's complicated. But luckily, they should know most of that stuff already.
Next up, and he asked two questions that made it in today because they were so highly upvoted.
God damn.
Is Ein, E-I-N, Brown. And it's the I think I've gotten a little confused question.
Okay. I can't look at the name Ein and not think Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, fuck.
The corgi, right?
That's right. And a bitch with the
wait, oh, we had two questions. Fuck. This is the wrong one. Let's find the other one. There we go. Got it.
All right. I think I've gotten a little confused about central nervous system fatigue and systemic fatigue. Is CNS fatigue always a global fatigue affecting all muscles? No. The central nervous system fatigue can actually be to the part of the motor cortex and all of the nerves that only affect one muscle. So no, CNS fatigue does not have to be global. It can be specific. And does it accumulate across a mesocycle, or is it more short-lived? It absolutely accumulates across a mesocycle. Chris Beardsley writes that under normal, non-pathological circumstances, any reductions in strength that last more than 24 hours must be caused by muscle damage. That's wrong. Chris Beardsley can't prove that. Chris Beardsley says a lot of shit that he takes out of one study in undergraduate and concludes on everyone. Sorry, I was going to be real nice, but this shit is a bit.
No, I agree. Just so you guys don't think Dr. Mike's being rough.
He's got a lot of good stuff that he says, but sometimes
totally
he makes like really insane blanket statements that are just by no means clear to anyone else reading the literature.
And this is something that you can look up, and sorry for kind of tangenting, but this is, you can look at the ice bath stuff. Look at the research on ice bath. They find that you can return to performance more quickly with the ice bath, and they largely attribute that to nervous system changes.
Yeah. And
almost no tissue change.
Yeah. So does that mean MRV is dictated by the accumulation of muscle damage? It is in part. It is part of the picture. Does accumulated muscle damage result in spillover fatigue that affects performance in other muscle groups? Yes, it does, in many ways, one of which is the cytokine hypothesis. Muscle damage essentially allows some of them are hormones, some of them are other substances, leak into increased concentration in the bloodstream. And a high level of these hormone or of these substances in the bloodstream signals various other parts of your body, including your brain, to experience fatigue, because it's basically like a global indicator of damage. So, and you can tell, like, if you really trained legs hard and your legs got super sore, you're not 100% in your mental game on your chest or on your back or something like that. And especially if lots of your body's sore, it really does add up. So muscle damage is a component of local fatigue and systemic. Central nervous system fatigue can be systemic in nature and it can be local in nature. So it's a little bit of a complex puzzle, and it's not just one thing or another.
Yeah, totally agree. And you guys can think of this in another silly way, in that when you are dieting and you start getting weird food cravings, right? So if you've been dieting for a while, you might be like, man, like I just have a hankering for some peanut butter or for something else, right? Is it because you desperately want peanut butter? No, it's because there's a cacophony of chemical signals in the body going, I have more reactants than, I have more products than reactants right now. This is kind of fucked up. We need to start sending some subconscious signals up top to the conscious guy that he needs to eat things like fats. And peanut butter is just one of those fats you typically have around the house. So you want some peanut butter, right? Same thing goes with in the other direction, kind of with like the muscle damage and fatigue, right? When you accumulate a lot of muscle damage, especially if you're training your whole body, you start to have these cellular signals going around, and they start to have subconscious or unconscious effects, which eventually start translating into conscious effects, like the manifestations of what we would call fatigue. So same idea.
Excellent stuff. Next up is Alejandro Mayofret.
Holy spicy.
That's Alej.
Got it.
He's got Andro right in his name. He's already jacked.
And Mayo.
That's true. God damn, this is the most muscular human of all time. How should you count protein coming from non-complete vegetarian sources? For example, bread, rice, pasta. In the RP book, in the section regarding PDCAAs, their punctuation is like 0.5 to 1. So does that mean that we should count half the protein content they have? Thanks a lot, docs. Actually, there are 3 ways you can go with this, and I'd probably use just one of the 3 ways and stick to it. It doesn't really matter which one you use. You just have to have a couple caveats in it. 1, you can count them as 0 protein because some of them are quite low on the effect. And you just count their protein calories into the carbohydrate column, okay? You can do that, and that's totally fine. So that's that. Or you could just count their calories in a just calorie column so that your calories are not the summation directly of your proteins, carbs, and fats, kind of like you would count alcohol. Okay, that's totally fine to do. The second one is you can do a fractional count where you count them for about half, right? You could come from 2/3, a quarter. You could dive deep into the literature pointlessly to see which one is best, depending on a food. But on average, you can count one for half, and that's fine. So, for example, if you're eating bread, and it's got 10 slices of bread that you're eating, like the Mike Israel diet, and each slice has a gram of protein, you can say that those 10 slices of bread contribute 5 grams of protein, and the others you just count as carbs or just count as calories, 4 calories per gram, and non-label. Okay. Lastly, you can just count all of them as exact protein sources, 1-to-1. Okay, every single one. The 10 grams of protein comes from 10 grams of bread in that case. But for that last one, you have to make sure that the majority, and I will say 75% of your proteins are coming from very high value complete protein sources. Because if you do count them 1-to-1, especially if you're eating a lot of vegetarian sources, especially if you're vegan or vegetarian, you get in a situation where the vast majority, if not all of your protein, comes from very shitty sources. And then you think you're eating 200 grams of protein a day, but the real oomph of that is like 50 to 100 grams of protein per day as far as effect. So on anabolism and so on and so forth. So if you eat the vast majority, if you're eating like multiple chicken breasts a day and whey protein, can you count the other shit as protein? Yes. Is there one better method than the other? Not necessarily, but those are the 3 methods. Just know that with the first method, you can have any kind of protein source you want because you're only counting the complete ones. In the second method, it's a decent one. It sort of splits it 50-50. It's probably the most truthful one as far as deep logic is concerned, but it does require you to count things in half and count the other half as calories, blah, blah, blah. And then the last method is the simplest. You just count them you just fucking count them. And that's the easiest one to put into like trackers. Like for example, my Fitness Pal and stuff like that, because they don't fraction out for you and they never will, or probably never will. So that's the simplest one, but then you have to make sure you're eating, good high quality protein sources for most of your diet. And you're not doing this thing where you tell people you eat 400 grams of protein a day, but it's really a shitload of rice, bread, pasta, and actually only chicken breast or something like that. Sometimes these ancillary sources add up to where you're like, oh my God, my proteins, here's the people get in trouble. They say, I can eat 200 grams of protein a day. And then they start putting MyFitnessPaling everything. And they get up to 200 grams of protein with only 1 chicken breast and 1 egg because they ate so much rice and pasta. They're like, I can't eat any more protein. This is crazy. That's a mistake. And that's something that needs to be rectified.
Oh my God. I'm getting my PTSD from coaching is getting triggered right now.
Oh yeah. I'm sure
this is a real exact problem that Mike was describing. But the good news here is that, for the most part, you can't really fuck this up too bad as long as you do this consistently over time. The only way that, at least that I can see, that you can really fuck this up,
hold my beer,
is if you're not keeping track of your body weight, right? So that's just like a total noob error first off, because then your calories could be all over the place. Who knows? But really is if you're doing that third option and you are just constantly way under on the protein. If you're trying to be a jacked person and you're just way under on the quality on the protein, that's really the only situation where you can really do a bad job with this. If you're doing one of the first option or the second option or some kind of in between, as long as you're doing it consistently and you're doing the very basic things like having a rough idea of your calories, tracking your body weight, and counting all of these things in the same way, it largely works itself out over time, so long as you don't find yourself in the trap of that third option where you've been chronically under eating protein for way too long. That's really the only, at least, unless Dr. Mike, you can think of anything else, that's the only way I see people fucking this up.
Yeah, just getting into the numbers are all that matter, starting to eat a lot of their little favorite foods, and then protein comes mostly from Pop-Tarts, and you're just, guys, the bodybuilding core diet works really well because it works logically. Plenty of meat, eggs, fish, great high quality vegan protein sources. That's what fucking builds muscle because it's high value protein. So if you think you've hacked dieting and you can eat only pizza crust and get jacked, then you may not have hacked what you think you have. So.
That's like the barn dog diet, old pizza crusts.
Exactly. Yeah, just like eating pizza boxes, you technically have protein.
Pizza flavored boxes.
Yeah. All right. So very, very good question there. Who's up next? Again, it's Ein Brown.
Oh, the second Ein Brown question.
The second question.
Oh, I'm back on the first. There we go.
Very good question. My impression is that within a single session, there are diminishing returns in how much additional stimulus you get for each additional set above minimum effective volume. In other words, I'm wondering if one were to do 90% of the usual volume every month, say by slowing down weekly progression or set progression, would this generate something like 95% of the stimulus and not 90% of the stimulus?
So, sorry, can I nip something in the butt here really quick? Within a single session, there are diminishing returns in how much additional stimulus you get for each additional set above MEV. No. So there's a huge range of above ME, from MEV and beyond, where adding sets can be beneficial, but there is a point at which that does become problematic, right? And that's usually what we would call, in the dose response relationship world, we would call that like the session MRV for whatever muscle group that you were training at that point. But adding sets above MEV is actually a good idea in many cases. Maybe not all cases, but definitely in many cases.
So the first set above MEV gives you the biggest difference from no growth to growth. The second set you add gives you a huge difference, but a smaller relative change, though absolutely it's still adding.
And yeah. I think that's what he meant. He's saying per set, each additional set is less stimulative, but they summate. That's the issue. So I don't know if that was a phrasing
thing.
Sure.
It's not like 90%. So we'll get to that in a sec. If you were to do 90% of the usual volume every month, say by slowing down weekly percent progression, would this generate something like 95% of the stimulus, not 90? Yes, probably. That's probably true. Let's keep going. If so, that means one can get a higher stimulus per time investment or stimulus per set if one is willing to forego a higher stimulus per month. Yes, also true, which seems appealing if you have modest goals for one muscle group or for your physique in general. Totally. And this is something that when we get into the more technical lectures that are going to come out on YouTube over the next several years, as we have lectures written and planned out for that long. And, we get into this big time in the hypertrophy book. We actually have a list of recommendations in the hypertrophy book, which is coming out in about a month, by the way, of like, if you are looking for the best stimulus to time ratio, like you don't have a lot of time in the gym, what do? Do not drive the volumes really high, because that's for the optimality people that want everything out of it. That's not for the just do a good job people. Just doing a good job actually doesn't require that many sets, which is amazing because you can get great gains training at like 15 sets per week. You get better gains, 20 sets per week, for example, and just slightly better gains with 25 sets. The thing is, we always speak from optimality first, and then we regress backwards. But we do address, and we will address, the fact that you're completely correct. You can get good results with way less volume, because it's not one of those, the light is either on or off. It's not like either I get perfect results or I get no results. That's absolutely not the case for most people, especially beginners, especially those with modest goals. And then he says, would MEV volumes give the maximum amount of stimulus per set? Yes, just over MEV volumes would give the max amount of stimulus per set. That's very true. If not, are there perceptive indicators to judge how much volume you would? No, I think that your answer is already correct. Is there a quantitative rule of thumb, like a certain range of sets above MEV? No. We're aiming to end your meso at a certain percentage of the volume that normal MEV to MRV progression would produce. No, I think that if you go to the gym and you're getting decent pumps and a little bit of soreness and a little bit of swag to your muscle, you're making really good gains, and you will continue to make good gains until you don't make any gains at all, or the gains start getting shitty. Then you have a question of, your 90% effort is no longer good enough to get you anywhere. And then you have to make a maximum effort. It's kind of like this. You're launching rockets out of your backyard with a bottle rocket launcher. Very simple setup can get your rocket to go 150 feet into the air. Now, if you want it to go 250 feet into the air, you're going to have to invest like quite a bit more time into it. If you want your rocket to go to the moon, you need a $10 trillion space program or whatever. Like it's a huge escalating curve for maximum performance. So know that. And if you, with training age and with increasing goals, because here's the deal. People say like, I just want the basics. And then when you get to be 170 pounds and pretty lean, like, well, I still want to gain. Like, but you're 175 and lean now. Anything beyond this isn't the basics anymore. Like, well, it is for me. Like, no. You are now more advanced. For you to go to 180, it will require a big ass rocket, some Elon Musk shit. And that's just where you are. So know that yes, a very small stimulus will get you pretty fucking far. But when it no longer doesn't, you need more, and you will need more, and it's something to expect. James?
Yeah, that was a good explanation on that because it's a complicated issue, and really, it's kind of an issue of trade-offs too. You're basically saying like, I want to be more fit, but I have time constraints, or I just can't commit that much to this. Can I get like okay gains doing a lot less? Yeah, you can. If you want to get better than okay gains, then you have to assess the trade-offs and say like, can I add another day per week? Can I add maybe 20 minutes per session? Those are just things that you'll have to juggle at some point. And if you want to keep getting more and more jacked over time, that level of commitment, unfortunately, just has to keep going up. And there's not really any way around it. I would also like to just highlight, I don't know if anyone else is noticing this. I couldn't help myself. Look at Jared's fix your Smith machine technique. What is he doing? It's so funny. And I know it's meant to be wrong.
Hold on.
Look at this. It's so funny.
Yeah. We tried to do
What is this?
Well, James, we've seen this at like gyms in Vegas. That was inspired by real events.
I believe you. It's just
hitting
really
his
funny.
glutes.
He's hitting all sorts of stuff. God damn.
Yep. All right. Next up.
See, look at fix your leg press. This guy, he looks like he's doing okay.
Yeah.
Like that's an okay leg
that's
press.
A bad thumbnail.
But this Smith machine squat? Oh no. What is happening?
That makes you click.
For sure. It's just funny.
All right. Mantas Pilipuchis is our next asker.
His name makes me think of like a cosmic manta ray that comes down to bestow wisdom upon you after you've completed your journey.
It's not wrong.
Mantas!
So Mantas Pilipuchis asks a very good question. Is it true that fatigue accumulates if the training is overloading? In my opinion, the fatigue should drop to almost zero on the rest days in the first weeks of a mesocycle, and it should start to accumulate only in your MRV. So a fatal conceit of your question is you said the fatigue should drop to almost zero and not zero itself. If it drops to almost zero, it will accumulate. Now, are we ready to say that every single bit of overloading training in every instance demonstrates a real world cumulative fatigue? Not like if you train like this for 80 years, eventually your fatigue will accumulate. No, we're not. For beginners, training very close to MEV, you may get weeks and months of training that does not result in any measurable cumulative fatigue, because your adaptations, your ability to recover and reduce fatigue at some point are actually escalating faster than you are overloading if you're training like that. The big takeaway of how to interpret our statements on fatigue accumulates if your training is overloading is, as you become more advanced and as you become bigger and stronger, and in almost every realistic mesocycle that you run that is progressively more difficult or takes enough time to get you good gains, fatigue accumulates if the training in that context as a whole is going to be a thing. Cumulative fatigue will be a thing as long as that training is overloading. Which is to say that if you are intermediate or above, and if you're trying to make your best gains, if you are looking for a type of training that is consistently non-fatigue accumulative, but still progressive and overloading and lets you get better, you are looking for something that doesn't exist but for fleeting moments of exceptions to rules. That's what we're talking about. So that's why the cumulative fatigue model is super, super effective. If you're actually trying to do a good job and you're no longer a raw beginner, and we're not just talking about maybe the first week or first two of your training cycle, if you are training in a real world manner, overloading training will accumulate fatigue when you want to do your best job and you're not super noob. Yes, we are saying that. James?
Yeah, and so Montes, your idea works well in like a beginner model, but completely falls apart once you hit kind of intermediate and above, because you say, all right, should almost drop to zero on the rest days. Well, like, how do you know how many rest days to take? Right? Like how do you know how many training days to take at that point?
James, sorry, let me cut in real quick. If you take enough rest days to get fatigue down to actually close to zero, you are no longer training in any way that is close to optimal, because you're taking such huge breaks between. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, you're right on the money. So that's kind of the idea, right? Where we're saying, well, if you have all these rest days, well, beginners do that. They only train 3 or 4 times a week. But, as you get more intermediate, it's very likely that you might have to upgrade to 4 or 5 times a week. And as you get advanced, maybe 5, 6 or more sessions per week, right? So at that point, where do those rest days come? You're bound to hit periods of, if not overlapping SRA curves, very close to overlapping SRA curves. And that's just the nature of training as you get more and more advanced, because you have to do more and more. So beginners, yes, you don't have to do a ton, and they can drop a ton of fatigue and still make great gains. But as your MEV and MAV characteristics rise over time, it's almost impossible to get a robust training stimulus without some residual fatigue. And that's just, I wish I could, what am I trying to say? So that's very clearly outlined from the stimulus perspective in the dose response literature. So I can say very confidently from a stimulus perspective, from the science, that is the case. I think from experience, we also know that if you are following that same trend, following the literature on what it takes to create a good stimulus and following our general recommendations on training age, in my experience, in my opinion, there's no possible way that if you are starting an overloading mesocycle as an intermediate or above, that you can drop to fatigue to baseline levels. It just never happens that way. If you can do that, that means you're not actually doing overload training either on a daily or weekly schedule. It just doesn't happen.
Jordan Herrera.
Not as spicy as I would prefer, but okay. That's all right.
I love this question because it lets us do a real zinger answer.
Oh no.
It's not.
I have to be zinger. Today I made a goal of like not being cunty, so I have to.
You're doing okay so far. All right.
I'm working.
Jordan Herrera says, "Hi, Dr. Mike and Dr. James. Thanks in advance. There are some muscle groups that I've observed that appear to be able to handle infinite volume. For example, my lateral.
I see where this is going. No.
The reason why I say such things
Push the
is
cunt
that
away.
I do not get sore. I feel the cunt leaving. I do not get sore on these muscles, or many times a day after working out such muscle. There, it feels like nothing happened, almost not detectable levels of disruption. I really feel like I'm taking steps close to failure. In other words, I'll do squats the next day and I'll feel like I did something to my quads, but for lats and lateral delts, it doesn't seem like I did that much all the next day. I'm getting a pump in specific muscles, however. Okay, so here's the deal. Let's just go back to saying able to handle infinite volume. Not being cunty, but you actually haven't tested this hypothesis. Because you say I've observed that appear to handle be able to handle infinite volume. You actually haven't observed that because you have on a scale of 0 to infinity, your volume has been awfully close to 0. Maybe you're doing 8 sets per session. Hey, 8, is it closer to 0 or infinity? Technically, any number is
that's
always
a shitty scale. That's everything's always close to 0 at that point.
I know. Let's call infinity. Okay, fine. Let's do a shortcut. Let's call infinity a trillion. How close is 8 to infinity versus 0? Real close. So, and I know you didn't really mean infinity. So a couple of things to your absolute credit where you're correct. Some muscles absolutely can handle more volume than others. And in part is the way they're designed, the way they're inserted, the way we can access them with exercises is just not very damaging. And there's other reasons for it. The muscle architecture can be different, so on and so forth. So that's absolutely the case. However, soreness is not the only indicator of being able to handle volume. Performance is absolutely the number one indicator. Sore or not sore, at some point the muscle just poops out on you. So what you can do is do more sets per session and do more sessions per week. So if you train a muscle twice a week, you say, oh, I can recover from whatever. Yeah, train that shit 4 times a week with the same number of sets. All of a sudden, by day number 4, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm getting weaker. Like I can't lateral raise what I used to. Ta-da, that muscle can't handle volume. You found its MRV, and all of a sudden you know where that range ends and how to play it. At the end of the day, there are some muscles, forearms, biceps for some people, many people, the side and rear delts. For some people, interestingly, the lats, for many people not. Upper back for some people. That doesn't include the lats in this case, like rhomboids or so on and so forth, mid traps. Some people can actually train them robustly, that is to say, with 3 to 10 sets per session, 6 days a week, right? But very few people can train a muscle with 12 sets per session, 6 days a week. That, what is that, 72 sets is a realistic cap for almost everyone, right? And there are people that can get there and a little bit beyond. There are 1 in 1,000 type of people. You're probably not one of them. By that, I mean, you're just probably not 1 in 1,000. It's just the case. So try to do more volume and especially more frequency. Push your sets like you're already doing close to fail. Watch your performance. It will plateau and then it will decline. That will be your MRV and the infinite volume. It's just higher volume. And look, we're here with you. It can be a lot fucking higher, surprisingly higher, way higher, but it's not infinite. All the sports science shit still holds true. They're not violating some kind of basic effect. It's still, they have everything as an MRV. Some people like to put that more curtly. They'll say, I feel like this so-and-so and such doesn't have an MRV. Bullshit. Walking has an MRV. You can't walk a marathon every day if you're the average person. You walk 26.2 miles one day, and then the next day, your ankles hurt, your feet have blisters, and then 1 week later, you're in the hospital. You can't walk for another week. MRV, hit while walking. It's all a matter of how much. James?
Yeah, that was great. I've experienced the same thing with the delts, the rear delts, and the lats. So I can give you at least some personal insights on this. I think with a lot of those muscle groups, you have to know. Okay, so the immediate thing that we always say. So you hear Dr. Mike and I say this all the time. You got to find good SFR exercises first and foremost. So you're probably picking exercises on those particular muscle groups which just aren't great for you, and or you're doing them in rep ranges which aren't great. So both of those are SFR, right? So the other thing that I have found with those muscle groups in particular, so like the lats is one of those, like if you're not doing 10 to 20 and you're like, my lats are like, I'm doing 6 to 10 and I can just do them forever, do 10 to 20, right? It's just one of those muscle groups. It seems to respond a little bit better to higher reps, at least in my experience. Same with the delts for the most part. Like if you're doing sets of like 8 on your fucking delts, get the fuck out of here. What I also have found with the delts is that they seem to benefit from using intensification techniques like pauses and slow eccentrics. So for example, if you're like, man, my rear delts, I can just do infinity. Well, are you just doing like bent over reverse flies? Try doing a cable curl, or a cable face pull with a peak contraction and like a 4-second eccentric. See if that makes a difference, right? Are you doing the same thing with the lateral raises? Are you just like lifting your arms up? Like, okay, we'll try like a thumbs down lateral raise where you peak hold and then bring it down for a 4 count, or even an upright row. Get those elbows way up high and then actually 4 count on the way down. Those are really, really good for developing the mind-muscle connection, and I think really increases the SFR on those particular movements. The lats is one, and the back muscles in general. If you're like me and like many other people, you might actually be able to train back like 4 times per week, split up however, suits you. But I have found like in the past where I would try to do a lot of heavy lat stuff where I'd be doing, weighted pull-ups and stuff, and I would just never make any progress. And then I just got my squat rack. I got the pulley thing.
Does that work pretty well?
Mike, even for my lanky Gumby ass, I can get full top and bottom. And I've had the best lat training I have ever had that I can think of, because I've been able to do straight arm pulls, right, for a higher rep range. I've been able to do a variety of pull downs, and I can still do some heavy stuff, either whether they're rows or heavier pull-up variations. But on average, you're probably going to want to bias your lat training to a higher frequency, say 3 to 4 times per week, with the majority of it being in that 10 to 20 rep range. And it might even benefit you to do some isolation stuff. Sidebar, on the straight arm pulls, I just discovered how to SFR myself into that movement better, because I, for whatever reason, I just never had a lot of luck because my triceps would burn out always on the straight arm pulls. What I found is actually for myself and for all you lanky people out there, I hope this is helpful. If you actually put yourself into a posterior pelvic tilt, which is the poop dog position, which normally is contraindicated for basically everything, for whatever reason, poop dogging allows me to pull my lats down much harder without my triceps giving out. And I've actually gotten like crippling lat soreness from that movement, which I never would have had in my life. So I changed my technique a little bit, way over. I was doing the same volumes that I was doing before, which was a mistake, after changing my technique midway through the mesocycle, and then it fucked me up really bad. So don't do what I did, but try poop dogging, see if that helps, because it helped me a lot.
Very good stuff. Very good stuff. All right. Last question for the day is Abdul Rahman Khaled.
Got it.
All right. Hi, docs. In your recent video, muscle gain periodization, in the application part, you said that when you get to a high percent body fat, you may do a 10-week fat loss phase, which can result in around 5% body fat decrease. I know you showed it only as an example, but as I thought, if mini cuts could be up to 1% loss per week, 1% weight loss per week, not pure fat loss per week, wouldn't a 5-week mini cut be a better time efficient option? No, because you probably only lose something like 3% of body fat during that time, and the rest is probably some combination of body water and very temporary muscle loss. So no, those two are probably not comparable. Being able to lose 5% body fat over 5 weeks is one hell of an accomplishment and is unlikely to occur. And then he says, or mini cuts mainly used for resensitization, To some extent, yes. They are used to resensitize you sort of nutritionally, a little bit training wise too, for further hypertrophy, which means they only ever really buy you, 2 to 4% lower body fat, 4 being pretty extreme, kind of like 2 to 3%. Just a little bit of bump so you can continue massing for another few mesocycles. And he says, kind of confused, if my goal is to get leaner over time, should I switch between a mass phase and mini cut? Nope. Mini cuts are only mass phase and mini cut is designed to make you fatter over time. Just not as fat as you would otherwise be. It's designed to make you muscular over time, but it won't address leanness. The periodization you have to do if you want to get leaner over time is massing, maintaining, and regular cutting, where the masses are maybe 2 mesos long and at a slow rate of gain. The maintaining is a meso or maybe just an active rest. Then the cutting is like 3 mesos long or like 12 weeks. You do a bunch of those, and over time, you still gain some muscle, but you get much leaner. If you want to get much leaner, you really go down all the way to where you start at a baseline of much leaner, skip the massing phases altogether, and just stack maintenance phases and fat loss phases back to back to back to back. It's a little bit more humbling. You're not going to be making gains during that time, but you'll get the whole process out of the way. For most people, 2 or 3 of those macro cycles of maintenance phases plus cutting phases is going to drop 20 to 30 pounds of body fat off their body, and they'll be lean enough to be ready to do whatever. So that's absolutely a consideration you can take. But no, mini cutting is not a way to get leaner long term. Period. It is a way to potentiate further mass gains in the short-term mass potentiation. And that is basically the essence of his question. James, anything? I know you love mini cut questions.
I can't let it go. I was trying not to. I can't let it go. Abdul Rahman, I appreciate your question. But look at this. If my goal is to get leaner over time, should I switch between a mass phase and a minute? So first of all, mass phase is out of the question if your goal is to get leaner over time, right? We'll just throw that out the window. And then a mini cut while trying to be in a net deficit where the fat lost in the mini cut is more gained in the mass, no, that is a disaster. That is the complete opposite of both things that you should be trying to do. Because what were you doing in that mass phase where the mini cut ends up in a net calorie deficit for the time? Oh my God, what? You're crazy. So no, I'm not trying to bag on you here, but just, when you think about it logically, it's like, oh shit, should I be massing to lose weight? No. Should I be doing suicidal mini cuts? No, don't do that. Do a reasonable, weight loss over time, whatever. Some people can do maybe 10 weeks. I have some clients who are particularly gritty and they can do 15 weeks and become okay. Pick what works for you. Understand that the longer you do any of the cut blocks, the longer you're going to generally have to maintain. And the more of subsequent cut blocks you do, the longer each of the maintenance phases will likely become downstream. That's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
Don't try and get there quick, and don't think that you can pepper in some fun mass phases to escape the pain of cutting.
Can, but it's going to cost you longer cutting.
So I would say, I think you're just, I don't know where you're coming from, but I would say take a deep breath, do something else for a minute, come back to it, and then you'll look at it and be like, what was I talking about? That's crazy talk. I should just do what a reasonable person would do, which is do a weight loss phase, recuperate, rinse and repeat. That's perfectly okay. No shame in that game. Pretty much 90% of the people that I have worked with throughout my career at RP do that. That's just the norm. So don't feel weird about it. It's totally fine.
Boom.
Is that it for today?
That's it for today.
Okay, one last funny one here. Is anyone else noticing Enter the Kettlebell, Pavel Satsulin here? Oh my God, it's look at this sexual kettlebell Russian army. What is this picture? Who approved this as the thumbnail? That's what I want to know. Who? Somebody looked at that and was like, yes.
Somebody clever, because that motherfucker got 2.5 million views, Jaffiel.
I think it's because of the thumbnail. It's so provocative.
That's it. People are like, is he going to have sex with that kettlebell?
Am I going to have sex with him? Maybe if I like it and then post a comment, I will.
Yay.
All right, let's see. Folks, I've done my final pass on the hypertrophy. Well, I guess it's not the final pass, but it's the final editing pass before we all do one final pass on the book. So that's good. I think hopefully, I think Mike said within the next month or two. So that's looking really good. I'm going to do another video soon.
About
that's
what?
All. Just sports stuff. So I'm going to introduce some of the concepts that I've been working on in the book that I'm trying to publish with RP, which is the new Volume Landmarks book. So I'm going to introduce the idea of applying the Volume Landmarks to fitness skills and tactics for sports. So I'm going to try and work on that and do some Q&A. But that's all I really got. Mike, you got anything fun?
I think that's about it, man. We're putting out, I will say this. Our videographer just recorded some sessions of Jared and I training, and he's making it like really artsy and like training motivation type videos. They're going to be fucking amazing. So they're the music and everything. So if you need some pre-training videos to get pumped to go train, we got you covered.
Well, seeing as how we grew up in a time where bodybuilders were putting out like promotional pump up videos, I don't know how I couldn't get pumped up from that shit. Do you know how many times I watched like the Branch Warren, Ronnie Coleman videos?
Flex Wheeler 1992 with the leotard.
Fucking
That's
hell.
what I'm talking about.
VHS quality. Yes.
Love it. I
love it. All right, folks. Thank you very much for engaging with us. Make sure you guys subscribe. There's all sorts of just wackadoo nonsense and some good stuff on the RP YouTube channel. There's all sorts of videos. It feels like there's like 3 or 4 per week at this point. It feels over. Every time I try to find the weekly webinar so I can look for the questions, I'm like, holy shit, there's so many videos.
That will continue.
Good problems to have. Make sure you guys subscribe, and thanks for engaging with us. This is Dr. James, Dr. Mike. See you next time.